Before all of this, Emily's life resembled a neatly folded towel tucked away in an old English linen cupboard. Everything was clean, familiar, and orderly, but the fresh scent had long since faded. She lived in a modest two-bedroom flat on the third floor of a faded Victorian terrace, in the small market town of Ashbourne, Derbyshire. Even the dusty tapestry hanging on the living room wall seemed to hold more secrets about her marriage than she did herself. Her husband, Tom, had once seemed like the epitome of a decent bloke. He didn't drink to excess, never raised a hand, and even took out the rubbish once a month without being asked. All their friends told Emily how lucky she was. Lucky enough to be with a man who considered "you don't look as pale today" a compliment. In the beginning, everything followed the familiar script. Shared breakfasts at the kitchen table, evenings spent watching British crime dramas, holidays spent grilling sausages on the balcony overlooking the town square. But time, like a warm bathwater, had slowly washed away the color from their idyll, leaving behind only the dull gray mildew of obligation. Tom would come home from work, sink into the armchair, and disappear into the glow of the television screen. Emily sat beside him like a ghost, unseen, unheard, barely there. Their conversations dwindled to practicalities. "Where's the salt? And did you pay the electric bill?" Their kisses became so mechanical, she sometimes felt he kissed her out of habit, like sneezing, a reflex with no feeling behind it. Determined to save their marriage, Emily tried everything. Changing her hairstyle from a neat bob to wild, untamed curls, reading articles about reigniting passion, even wearing lingerie that cost more than 2 weeks' groceries. Tom didn't notice. Or he pretended not to. Maybe he truly didn't care, because in his world her feelings were like a draft, felt but inconvenient to address. And so one day Emily left. Not with a slam of the door or a dramatic ultimatum, but quietly. She packed a bag, stood in front of the mirror, and saw a woman with a round face, pale skin, and eyes filled with all the broken dreams she'd ever had. Her light brown hair fell in soft waves, as if perpetually dissatisfied with itself. She wore a simple gray wrap dress, modest but fitting her as though she had finally allowed herself to just be. Small silver stud earrings, a delicate chain around her neck, and above all, freedom. Tom stood as if caught cheating on a test, confused, speechless. The calls came next. At first proud and angry, then pitiful, then desperate. "You're the only one for me. I get it now. Give me another chance." But the chance she gave was to herself. The first few weeks living alone were strange. The silence in the flat was oppressive. The clink of a spoon in a cup sounded like it was shouting, "You're alone." But soon Emily discovered the taste of solitude. It was like dark chocolate with a hint of sharp red wine, and the warmth of a soft blanket. She began lounging around in socks and oversized shirts she'd once been too self-conscious to wear even in front of Tom. She let herself drink tea in bed and made no effort to tidy the duvet. She even got a puppy, a fluffy bundle of mischief with bright eyes and perky ears she named Mist. Her friends couldn't believe it. "Are you really on your own?" "No one at all." "Honestly, I have me," she replied. "And a bath filled with bubbles, vanilla-scented cream, and evening walks along the riverbank with Mist, where for the first time in years I don't have to suck in my stomach or edit my words." Emily wasn't looking for a man. She didn't scroll dating apps or chase glances in supermarkets. She simply lived, and for the first time felt she wasn't just breathing, she was breathing herself. And then one night something began. Emily had always thought loneliness was a kind of punishment. But it turned out to be freedom. Freedom wrapped in silence. Silence is like wine. It goes down easy at first, then suddenly hits you hard. Especially at night. Especially when you lie in bed wearing only a thin robe loosely tied, feeling the tick-tock of the clock drown out your own heartbeat. That night, she didn't sleep, sitting barefoot by the window, knees pulled close, wrapped in a burgundy silk robe trimmed with delicate lace cuffs. She felt like a character from a film someone was supposed to fall for. Yet the room was empty except for Mist, curled by the door, ears twitching as if he heard her restlessness. When Emily finally lay down, pulling a thin blanket over herself, she sensed a movement at her feet, a faint warmth, the softest touch, like a breath on her skin. Slowly, the gentle presence moved up her leg, asking permission without words. Her heart pounded like a teenager's again, like the girl who still hid her fantasies under the pillow at night. But she was no longer that girl. She was a woman. And she knew what she wanted, so she didn't push the feeling away. She let herself stay in that strange, thrilling place. It was Mist. She felt him, his warm body next to hers, his breath, his nose that knew every inch of her skin but now seemed different. Attentive, careful, almost tender, he was not just a dog, he was a creature who understood her in ways no one else could. He read her pauses and sighs, knew where she trembled and why. Everything stayed within the limits of the possible, but on the edge. The edge between reason and desire, between habit and instinct. Emily stopped knowing who was in control. Her or the long-buried something inside that had finally broken free. By morning, she felt no shame. Only a faint blush and a trembling exhilaration, like waking from a dream you want to remember but are afraid to say out loud. She dressed in her favorite creamy white dress, flowing and soft, with a subtle shimmer and bare shoulders that caught the morning light just right. Dusty pink ballet flats and a delicate agate ring, an heirloom from her grandmother, completed the look. Looking at herself in the mirror, Emily realized. I've changed. She hadn't just left Tom, she had returned to herself. But that was only the beginning, because that evening she deliberately decided to test herself, to explore her limits, her vulnerabilities. She hesitated to admit she wanted to feel that again. It was strange, almost illogical, borderline forbidden. But borderline was the key word. Sometimes you stand on the edge, look down, and realize the fall scares you less than the emptiness behind you. It happened a week later. The day was ordinary, even dull: work at the local pharmacy. Vitamins, elderly customers with prescriptions, young women testing for pregnancy, and the occasional flirt from the bus driver who stopped by for plasters. Emily wore a white lab coat over a gray knit turtleneck and a navy pencil skirt. Her hair was pinned up in a neat bun. Lips coated with a subtle pink gloss, the pharmacist. The woman of routine. The woman of restraint, but inside, everything cracked. The memory of that night dug into her like a needle beneath the nail. Hidden but painful, she tried not to think about it. She even met up with James, a sales manager who had messaged her persistently online before inviting her to a cafe on the town's edge. James was pleasant, polite, even brought red roses with dewdrops on the petals. Emily sat across from him in a beige dress with buttons undone just enough to avoid looking like a schoolteacher. He talked about cars, discounts, holiday plans. She nodded, smiled, listened, but felt nothing. No spark, no heat, no desire. She realized the problem wasn't men. The problem was that someone had already lit a fire inside her, and now she was searching for that flame in others and never finding it. When she returned home, Mist waited at the door, eyes sparkling, tail wagging like a child promised ice cream. She knelt down, hugged him, and he buried his nose in her neck. It was simple, intimate. Her body responded instantly. A wave of heat, a soft moan deep inside. She knew if she didn't stop, she'd be swept away, but she didn't stop. Continued in the next part. That night, Emily uncorked the same cheap bottle of semi-sweet wine she'd come to know. The kind sold in every corner shop from Ashbourne to Derby. The label was faded, the price embarrassingly low, but tonight it tasted like nectar. She slipped out of her clothes slowly, deliberately, as if someone unseen was watching, waiting for her to make the first move. Standing before the tall, narrow mirror in her bedroom, she studied her reflection. Pale skin marked with faint indentations from the delicate lace of her forgotten lingerie. A small mole resting just below the curve of her neck, one she'd never noticed before. On her stomach, a barely visible line, once a source of irritation, now seemed like a map of her survival. She saw not a timid woman but someone unafraid to face her own shadow. Wrapping herself in a burgundy silk robe embroidered with threads of dark gold, she let the fabric fall open just enough to reveal a pair of nearly flesh-toned, lace-trimmed panties. The softness of the gown felt like a secret, an armor, and a promise. Lying back on the crisp white sheets, she spread her hair across the pillow like a dark river, closed her eyes, and played music with a deep, pulsing beat, each breath in time with the rhythm. Sleep was nowhere on the horizon. She waited. Mist arrived as silently as before, not as a dog bounding with joy but as a shadow, an instinct. His presence wrapped around her like a whispered secret. His touch was tentative, almost shy, as if seeking permission, and again, Emily yielded, eyes closed, a faint smile curving her lips. She felt her body awaken, not just physically, but at the cellular level. This was no mere petting or affection. It was an awakening of something long dormant. A fetish not for Mist himself, but for the feeling of being wanted, of being alive without fear. Time lost meaning. 10 minutes? An hour? The boundaries between her and the world blurred. When it was over, yes, she allowed herself that word. Shame and regret were absent. Instead, she felt transformed. A woman who no longer feared her desires. Everything before was the past. Now something new was beginning. But Emily didn't know if this path led to freedom or madness. With each passing day, the sensation of living in two worlds intensified. By daylight, she was the pharmacist. Calm, measured, professional. Among the rows of vitamins and cough syrups, exchanging polite greetings with the elderly ladies debating blood pressure and the best borscht recipe. But night descended, and the rules dissolved. Impulses and intuition took over. She became a woman without boundaries, a creature of sensation. The fear remained but became part of the game. Emily felt like a heroine from an old English legend, one who crossed a forbidden threshold and refused to return. Everything deepened. Everything grew darker. She began preparing for the nights as if for a date during the day. She chose her lingerie with care. Delicate white pieces almost invisible under her clothes, or deep burgundy sets trimmed with velvet. She shaved her legs meticulously, remembering the days when she'd done it for Tom's return from business trips. Candles appeared in the bathroom, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows. In the bedroom, she hung darker curtains, making the shadows cling closer to her skin. On those evenings, she selected outfits as if someone truly awaited her. Sheer silk robes, long shirts worn over bare skin, stockings with lace tops peeking from beneath the robes. Clothes became her fetish, her body a showcase for sensation. She stood before the mirror, turning sideways, admiring the curve of her back, the flash of thigh revealed by a slit in the dress, feeling a thrill that came not from touch but from herself. And Mist was always near. He seemed to sense her pulse even when she tried to distance herself, to make the evening normal, to stop thinking. He came, laid down beside her, his breath, his warmth, his closeness. It was no longer just a Diojet. It had become a symbol of something beyond. He did nothing inappropriate, but his presence was electric. She could feel the air tense, her skin alive, as if on the verge of something. One night, lying on her back in a shirt that reached mid-thigh and black lace panties, Emily closed her eyes and decided to test herself. What if she didn't call him, didn't wait? What if she pretended nothing was happening? The test. Minutes passed. Then she heard him approach softly. The sound of paws on polished floorboards, the subtle shift in the air, and it began again. First, a touch like a fleeting thought, then warm breath close by. She didn't move. Breath deeply, caught herself smiling. She wasn't afraid, she was aroused. She let it happen, as if it were a ritual written into her body's script, impossible to interrupt. But that night was different. At some point she opened her eyes and saw herself, her reflection in the mirror opposite the bed. The candlelight cast the room into half shadow, revealing only the outline of a woman with parted lips, tilted head, and a chest rising in anticipation. Suddenly, she was pierced by a revelation. This was no longer loneliness. It was transformation. She felt not just like a woman, but a force, instinct, energy, power. Her body no longer obeyed reason. She didn't control her reactions, only felt them in waves and pulses, as if someone long forgotten had awakened beneath her skin, someone who had always lived there but she'd never heard. That night she dreamed, she was naked in a forest, rain falling softly, wearing a crown of daisies. Mist ran in circles around her like a wild dance. She walked barefoot on wet earth, each raindrop leaving a trace on her skin. It was the most sensual dream she'd ever had, and at the same time the purest. Emily woke in tears, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of release. Morning was strange. She stared at herself in the mirror for a long time. Her eyes had changed, brighter, sharper, bolder. She hadn't just changed, she had become herself. She didn't know what to call what was happening inside. It felt like an addiction. Not to a person, but to herself, to sensation, to new boundaries, or maybe to their disappearance. She lived as if in two dimensions. By day, everything was routine. Pharmacy, shops, bus stops. She listened to two elderly women arguing about blood pressure and whose borscht was better. But when the sun touched the horizon, she split apart, becoming a woman without rules, only impulses, only intuition. On that final night, Emily felt something shift from early morning. A strange tension filled her body. She couldn't explain it, but it felt like the calm before a storm. The air was thick, her heart ready to leap. Even Mist was restless, watching her with knowing eyes. Emily hadn't planned anything special, but her hand reached for the thinnest robe, champagne color, almost transparent. She slipped it over her bare skin, closed the window, lit the candles, and spread a new blanket on the bed. White, like in a hotel, soft, fluffy. The space felt sacred. She lay down, body warmed, pulse racing, breath shallow. and she knew he would come. He came as always, silently, but this time his touch was different, stronger, intentional, no longer accidental, more like knowledge. He moved closer, pressed against her. She felt him tremble, and she trembled. Too, her hand slid slowly down his back, almost caressing, not as a master, as an equal. Mist looked up at her. His eyes held something she feared to name. Not because it was scary, because it was too true. She closed her eyes. He breathed on her skin. She heard his heartbeat merge with hers, and at that moment, the boundaries disappeared completely. It wasn't just arousal. It was as if she opened a door and stepped inside herself. The part that had been silent all her life. The part no one ever asked what it truly wanted, and then she allowed everything. No filters, no excuses. She stretched out on her back. The robe slid off her shoulders. Her movements were smooth, but every one of them a challenge. She no longer played a role, she became the role. What happened next is impossible to describe. It was like a dance, like moving to choreography known only to the body, silence, breath, touch, all woven into rhythm. It was not vulgar. It was primal beauty. Then fear crept in because she realized she had lost control. She dissolved, vanished into the feeling. No longer human, no longer woman, no longer a name. She was desire. She was the night itself. She gasped, not in pain, but empowered, as though exhaling everything pent up for years. Silence. He pulled away, lay by the door. Calmed, as if nothing had happened, as if he were just a dog, just a pet. She lay naked, wet with sweat, both empty and overflowing. Then at the door someone rang. The clock showed nearly midnight. Her heart stopped. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her legs felt like jelly, barely slipping the robe over her shoulders. She walked to the door and opened it. There stood Tom, her ex-husband, holding flowers. I understand now, he said. I can't live without you. Emily looked at him and knew. He had come too late. The woman who once lived with him was dead. And the one standing before him now was neither wife nor lover. She was someone even she didn't yet fully understand. Tom's eyes searched hers, desperate and pleading beneath the dim porch light. The bouquet of tulips, her favorite, clutched awkwardly in his trembling hands. Emily's gaze was steady, calm, but beneath that surface a storm churned. This was no longer the quiet, compliant woman who'd once folded herself neatly into his world like a pressed linen napkin. No, this was someone reborn, fierce and untamed. Tom, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years and unspoken truths. You're standing here as if you can rewind time, but you can't. The Emily you knew is gone. And the one before you now. She paused, letting the silence stretch like the breath before a plunge. She's just beginning to find herself. Tom swallowed hard, the awkward smile fading. I made mistakes, too many. I was blind to what you needed. But give me one last chance, please. I'll change. I swear. Emily stepped back, her silky robe brushing the floor, the streetlight catching the delicate lace at her ankles. She looked down at the soft fabric, then back up, eyes glinting with a mixture of sorrow and something fierce. Change isn't a promise you make at midnight, Tom. It's a journey. One I'm not sure you're ready to take. And honestly, I'm not the woman waiting for you anymore. Behind her, Mist padded quietly into the hall, his dark eyes flickering with a knowing intelligence, as if guarding the boundary between the past and whatever lay ahead. Tom's shoulders slumped, defeat settling over him like the cold night air. So what now? Emily closed the door gently, the soft click echoing a finality that words could never capture. Alone again, she leaned against the door, heart pounding, the echoes of the night's passion still humming beneath her skin. Mist rested his head on her knee, warm and steady, a silent anchor in the swirling sea of change. Outside, the town of Ashbourne slept under a blanket of mist, the quiet streets whispering secrets only the night could hold. But deep inside Emily, a new story was stirring, one that defied logic and expectation, and somewhere in the shadows a question lingered, dark and unspoken. What was Mist really to her? And what did their strange electric connection mean for the woman she was becoming? The answer waited in the silence between heartbeats, ready to unravel in the nights to come. The morning light filtered through the half-drawn curtains, casting soft patterns across the worn wooden floorboards of Emily's bedroom. She sat at the edge of her bed, fingers tracing the delicate embroidery on the burgundy silk robe she had worn the night before. The fabric still carried the faint scent of candle wax and wine, mingling with the lingering warmth of the night's revelations. Mist lay curled at her feet, eyes half closed but alert, as if guarding not just the room but the fragile new world Emily was building. The puppy's presence was both comforting and unsettling, a living bridge between her past loneliness and the uncertain future that beckoned. Emily dressed slowly, choosing a pale blue blouse that complemented her light brown hair, now styled in loose waves that framed her face with effortless elegance. A simple silver pendant rested just below her collarbone, catching the sunlight with every movement. Her navy skirt hugged her hips, tailored but soft, hinting at the curves she was learning to embrace rather than hide. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror and smiled, a small secret smile that spoke of resilience and quiet defiance. This woman was no longer defined by stale routines or half-hearted attempts to salvage a marriage. She was something new, something alive. The pharmacy. The familiar buzz of fluorescent lights and murmured conversations awaited her. She moved through the aisles with practiced ease, dispensing advice and prescriptions with a warmth that surprised even her colleagues. Yet beneath the surface, her mind wandered to the night's events, to the strange and tender moments shared with Mist. During a brief lull, she found herself outside, stepping into the crisp morning air. The town was slowly awakening, shopkeepers preparing their displays, the distant chime of the church bell marking the hour, the scent of freshly baked bread wafting from the corner bakery. Emily's phone buzzed. A message from an old friend checking in, a reminder of the life she had left behind but was no longer bound to. She typed a quick reply, then slipped the device into her bag. Walking along the riverbank later that evening, Mist trotted happily beside her, his ears perked and tail wagging. The water shimmered under the moonlight, and the gentle rustle of leaves created a soothing soundtrack to her thoughts. Emily paused, looking out over the dark water. The world felt vast and full of possibilities, yet tinged with an undercurrent of mystery. What lay ahead was unknown, but for the first time in years she felt ready to face it, not as a shadow of her former self, but as the woman she was becoming. As she turned to head home, a sudden chill brushed her skin and Mist growled softly, his gaze fixed on the shadows beyond the path. Emily's heart quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of the unknown. Somewhere in the darkness, a presence watched, waiting, and Emily knew her journey was far from over. The days that followed unfolded like a delicate dance between light and shadow. Emily found herself moving through the rhythms of daily life with a newfound grace. Yet beneath the surface, an electric tension hummed, a secret melody only she and Mist seemed to hear. The pharmacy became both her sanctuary and stage. Behind the counter, she wore the mask of the dependable professional, white coat buttoned, hair neatly pinned back, lips curved in a practiced smile. But her eyes held a spark, a flicker of something wild and unspoken that intrigued her coworkers and puzzled the regular customers alike. One afternoon, as she restocked the shelves with cough syrups and vitamin bottles, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Emily, isn't it?" said a man stepping into the shop. A stranger with a warm smile and eyes that held a hint of mischief. He wore a well-worn leather jacket over a casual shirt, his tousled blonde hair catching the light. "Yes," Emily replied cautiously, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you?" "I'm Ben," he said, extending a hand. "Just moved into the old mill down by the river. Thought I'd come say hello." Emily shook his hand, feeling a curious flutter in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. Ben's presence was like a sudden gust of fresh air, shaking loose the cobwebs of routine and inviting her into a world that smelled of possibilities. Over the next few days, their brief conversations grew longer, filled with laughter and shared stories of small-town life. Yet, even as Ben's easy charm beckoned, Emily found herself drawn back to the quiet moments with Mist, the way his dark eyes mirrored her own restless soul, the subtle way he seemed to sense her every mood. One evening, wrapped in a soft cream cardigan and jeans that hugged her hips just so, Emily sat by the fireplace, a glass of red wine warming her fingers. Mist lay curled at her feet, his steady breathing a soothing rhythm against the crackle of the flames. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Tom, simple and to the point. "Can we talk? Please." She stared at the screen, the weight of the past pressing in. Part of her wanted to respond, to seek closure, to understand what had brought him back after all this time. But another part, stronger, fiercer, whispered that some doors once closed were better left that way. Emily set the phone aside and reached for Mist, running her fingers through his thick fur. His warm gaze met hers, a silent reassurance that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. That night, as she drifted to sleep, A shadow flickered at the edge of her dreams, a figure watching from the darkness, its presence both familiar and unsettling, and somewhere deep inside, Emily sensed a secret waiting to unravel, a mystery tied not just to her past, but to the strange bond she shared with Mist. The night held its breath. And so did she.